Well, thank you everyone for making it on here today. I know the city of Nixa said they can't make it. They've got leadership training. Jeremy said he'd be a few minutes late, but hopefully he will pop in. And so just real quick in the agenda packet, we do have the meeting notes from the last meeting. I tried to summarize kind of the survey discussion kind of by the survey number as we went through. So hopefully that makes sense. But if anyone sees any corrections, just let me know. But in the interest of time, I know, Matt, you said you have to leave a touch early. So I thought we'd just kick off and have a discussion about just kind of the state of some of our partner agencies and the modes that they work with. And then we can kind of get into the rest of the discussion. So Matt, I will let you kick it off. Do you have anything you want to share?
I could, but it's 2 slides.
Okay, so yeah, let me make sure.
But I don't need to either, so.
Oh. There you go. You should be able to.
Here we go. All right. So are you seeing that?
Yes.
Okay. So really, 2 things: current initiatives and future initiatives. For us here at Transit, we are currently awaiting the production and delivery of electric buses. Those should hit the line in mid-April and arrive at our facility late May. We're using this as a test bed for transit, for our large fleet here at the utility, and hopefully as a demonstration fleet for agencies and companies regionally, on how you could implement this and what are the things that you need to consider. So we're working on electric buses now. We've got a training simulator coming on site, probably about the same time, mid to late May. And this will allow us to revamp our full training program, including safety, driving, and customer service. So we're looking forward to that.
How many buses are you getting?
Do what?
How many electric buses are you getting?
We're getting 2 electric buses.
Okay.
And so our training simulator, we're hoping to be able to bring people in and demonstrate some of the things that we do, what it's like to drive a bus, and also hopefully use it to interest some people in considering driving as a career, because we think we provide a pretty good employment opportunity here at the utility. We also are looking right now at updating and creating some lighting at some bus stops away from shelters in particular. We've got a few stops that are some problems for us at night. So we're buying a couple of different test solar lights that we'll install at some bus stops. And then we're also working with the electric department about street lighting and figure out how they place street lighting, or if there's things they can do to help us where we might have stops that are completely on a dark section. So kind of the advantage of being attached to the electric utility, and that group is required by city charter to provide street lighting. We're gonna see if we can't leverage our relationship with them a little bit to do something for lighting and develop a plan going forward. And also we're gonna introduce hybrid minivans into our fleet, hopefully this year, to supplement our paratransit service and make us a little more mobile or agile on the road to provide service to single occupancy trips. And we're looking forward to that. I think that's really going to help us rethink how we deliver paratransit service in Springfield. So that's what we have going currently, the big push. And then thinking about our future, I'm going to drop down to the bottom of this slide first. Currently, we should have done a survey of our system or an analysis of our system last year. We performed a fixed route operation analysis with the help of the OTO in 2012, I believe it was. And we were scheduled to do that again last year in 2020. We've pushed that effort off for the completion of Forward SGF and the Destination 2045, so we can see what are the people in the community saying they want from transit. Because we can say we want to grow transit, we'd love to see 15-minute headways, and we can develop a plan to do that. But unless there's funding and support for it, we're probably asking the wrong questions or looking for the wrong answers. So we're waiting until we see the results of those, and then we're gonna sit down and really figure out what do we want to do with this information and try to use a fixed route operational analysis to develop a solid plan and not just throw somebody's wants and whimsies out as our plan. So what we do plan on focusing on in the future, continue to focus on our training, figure out how are we going to serve our customers better, and how are we going to deliver that customer service. We're looking at digital signage on the buses, at the transit center, and potentially at some of our major stops where you'll find beyond a shelter, you'll find double shelters or greater level of amenities there. So like at the mall or the Walmart on North Glenstone and Kearney. So we're looking at some amenities there that would indicate when a bus is going to arrive, and hopefully be looking at things like including arrival times and bus occupancies, because people want to know how many people are on that bus before I wait on it. And then we're gonna utility is kind of taking an opportunity to look at our mission and vision statement, and we're going to really, I've heard the phrase, and I don't think this is the phrase they're going to land on, but a relentless focus on the customer. We're gonna figure out what that means for us at transit. We've purchased some technology in the last few years that has allowed us to see what we can do. Now we want to focus in on really what should we be doing with this information, and the next round of purchases will focus on what can we deliver to the customer. And then always we want to look at system growth. Where should we grow the system? But that is always going to be coupled with where are we going to find the funding to do it. So there's a lot of questions about where are we going to find additional funding outside of the utility to fund the growth that we are told the community wants, and make sure that is what the community wants. And that's what I've got for our future plans. Natasha?
Okay, thanks. Any questions for Matt?
I got a question, Matt.
Sure.
On your hybrid minivans, is that a current service that you provide, or is that going to be a new service once you get the minivans?
That is a current service that we provide. We provide Access Express paratransit service, which complements the fixed route service. It's just in addition to the fleet. So you're used to seeing what a lot of people would call a shuttle bus or a cutaway, similar to what the Bearline runs. This will just be a smaller, more agile vehicle. It's going to have a ramp in the back. The back gate lifts up. There's going to be a ramp that drops down, and there's an alleyway for two wheelchairs. We'll probably use them as a single occupancy delivery service. So sometimes we have to pull one of those cutaways out at night for a single person to go somewhere. And we'll just pull that out, and it'd be a lot quicker to maneuver around town.
Nice, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Matt? Okay, well, thank you, Matt, for providing that information.
Thank you.
I would like to next, just for the interest of keeping things grouped together, go ahead and switch over to Cole Pruitt with MSU, and he has, see, can everyone see a slide that, okay. He's got a slide here, and Go ahead, Cole.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time today, and OTO giving me the opportunity and platform to discuss the Bearline. I kind of put it together similar to Matt. Kind of what our current features are going to be, and where we are within those three categories of ridership, accessibility, and routing. And then we'll follow up with what our future looks like in those three areas as well. Our current status is we're operating at full capacity with our full routes out there right now, with no limitation as far as how many folks can be on the bus. We are requiring masks, and we do have additional cleaning that's going on in those shuttles. Our ridership is significantly down. I think that there's many factors to that, whether it's the COVID cases or with COVID in general, students being on campus or class schedules. All that's kind of playing a factor into the reason why we've had lower ridership currently. I will say that the spring semester we've kind of hit the ground running and seen an uptick on our ridership, and some of that has to do with the weather that the Ozark has experienced right now. Folks don't want to wait out or walk outside while it's significantly colder than what they're accustomed to, along with the big snow that came through and some of that inclement weather. I think the impact on that's been to the COVID cases tracked at the university has been down since the start of the spring semester compared to what it was, as we left for the fall semester. And another thing is, and this is just from an observation standpoint, I don't necessarily have any statistical data on it, but there appears to be a lot more students on campus this spring than kind of what was at the fall. I don't know if that's class schedules or how things have been designed as far as classes go at the university. I know we're still running a hybrid class kind of look. So if you have a Tuesday, Thursday class, you may be in class on Tuesday and then doing a virtual learning session on Thursday. So that kind of split. So I'm not sure if that was intended by the university or correlated, but certainly definitely seen an uptick in students being on campus the first part of this semester. For our accessibility portion, right now our drivers are making announcements. We have signs that are at each stop, and kind of what I would say is dated signs, signs that definitely have the opportunity to be improved. And then we also have some of our accessible ramps that we have opportunity to do better in those areas. So that's kind of our current status there and things that we're looking at. We recently upgraded our passenger counting system, and by doing that, gives us the ability to enhance our accessibility options, both on the shuttle and in the shuttle stops areas as well. And lastly, our current status with our routing is, just from my few short years here at the university, one of the things that I wanted to focus on has been just the routes and how they are being ran. I think there's an opportunity to become more efficient in that area, from what I understand of our system and some of the stops that have been indicated across the university or the university's footprint, either those stops were developed or put in place by our Student Government Association. Well, of course, that's turned over in times, and it may not necessarily be as utilized stop as it once was intended. So we'll be kind of looking at that. So our future is kind of, it's bright for the Bearline. We want to continue operating at full capacity, obviously, while following the recommendations of the CDC and our local government officials. We want to update our Bearline look, so that's going to be happening in the future. You see the jump on that is kind of going to go away, and we're going to just update the look as a whole. And then that'll help provide obviously a better marketing for the university. I have some creative ideas that are not quite ready to roll out on how we'll do that, but we would like to be pretty inclusive, not only for the university, but also for our community as well. Our ridership, I would anticipate us experiencing some significant increases. There's a few factors that are behind that. As most of the folks on this Zoom know, the daylighting of Jordan Creek project is still in play. With that, there's three Missouri State parking lots that will be affected by that, which will reduce the parking that's available for the university downtown. We have plans to replace some of that parking. However, we're not going to be able to capture all those spaces, so it definitely won't be a one-for-one replacement. So with that, we would anticipate that we would see an increase of our ridership on the Bearline for the simple fact that there may not be as much parking available downtown. Another factor of that is we see a student trend with students may not necessarily be getting their licenses at the age of 16. Most of us on this call are from a generation where we couldn't wait to get our licenses, and when Missouri went from 15 and a half to 15, we would have been all on board with that. Well, it's not necessarily the trend that we're seeing with today's groups as they come through. So we see that there's significantly less freshmen bringing vehicles to class for the university. So that means they're going to be utilizing the transportation system that's been provided to them. Next reason for that is students are more conscientious about multimodal services that are available to them. So maybe they do have a car on campus, but they won't move it throughout the week, and they'll utilize the systems that are provided for them. And then finally, it's class schedules. I would anticipate us kind of holding a trend to hybrid classes, but over time, I would see that trend would probably die back down a little bit. I think that there'll be some professors who will still continue wanting to offer that, but there'll be a lot more that will want to have seated courses. So that will increase students being on campus. From an accessibility standpoint in the future, as I alluded to earlier, we replaced our passenger counting system, which gave us some more availability on what we can do. Audio announcements are big, so we'll be able to geofence those in, along with providing some LED lights inside and outside the shuttle that will be geofenced, so we can capture those folks who may be visually or hearing impaired. Obviously, we're working closely with our planning, design, and construction team to upgrade our stops to become more accessible, more in line with accessibility. It's something that the university is taking pride in and has a keen eye for as we continue to progress in our ADA plans. And then lastly, the future of our routing. We want to look at overhauling all of our routes, and by doing this, we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students, but also providing service to the community. We'll work closely with CU Transit, as we have in the past, to continue to see where our two systems can cross paths where it makes sense, and then making the adaptations to the changes in our parking scene downtown. So there may be some flexibility that we have to do, and maybe we design a route that makes the most sense on paper. However, as we all know, when you plan like that, there's things that we don't foresee until we get out there and do it. So at that point, I think that concludes what I had, Natasha, and happy to field any questions if there are any.
Okay, thanks. I have one. Are you guys, and I know, COVID's probably changed some things, but are you still running some of the, we'll call them more off-campus shuttles? I know for a while there you were doing something on South Glenstone for some classes, and then maybe the mall. And do you see you guys stepping more into that role, or looking to have a stronger partnership with CU in the future?
Sure. Great question, Natasha. Currently, our Saturday route is not necessarily linked to the Bearline. So our international department handles that, as it was the majority of our international students who were requesting that. Certainly we support that. The off-campus that you alluded to a moment ago was down to Glen Isle. That was because there was a renovation being done at Hill Hall, so we had to bump classes out to the Glen Isle shopping area. So that's why that route would go there. I wouldn't anticipate us going too far off of campus. However, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, as it would be where the Student Government Association would like to see us go, and then working closely with all the entities, whether it's the City of Springfield or CU Transit, in order to make those things work. I think that we can do a better job, not that we're not doing a job, but a better job with CU Transit to make sure that we're connecting to their service as we should be.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Cole? All right, well, thank you, Cole, for that. And let's see. Next, go back kind of to the first of the agenda. I'm going to share the MoDOT freight plan. MoDOT is in the midst of updating their statewide freight plan. So I thought it'd be MoDOT put together a really great set of notes related to kind of their kickoff meeting, and it included some information also on the state of freight in Missouri. And so I thought I would just share that real quick. And first of all, the group that they have meeting on this has identified some goals. I thought those would be good to point out. And I'll actually go through. They went ahead and ranked them. And so safety was rated highest, and then economic competitiveness, asset preservation, and then mobility, reliability, and multimodal. And then there's also discussion about adding sustainability as a goal. And so moving on to the freight profile, the majority of freight moves by truck at 60%. And that includes, let's see, that includes farm products, non-metallic minerals and crude oil. And then for rail, coal is the highest. So through traffic of this freight going through the state's about 44%. Rail traffic, because of the coal, about 58% of that is inbound. And so we do really just have a lot of freight moving in and out. And apparently Illinois is our largest trading partner as far as freight goes. So then there was some discussion about assets, and one of them related to truck parking, and I-44 has the highest concentration of available spaces for truck parking, but there's still some analysis going on about supply and inventory. But I also know that those locations and the needs for the different spaces is also shifting. So looking at rail, just as an FYI, about 20 railroads in total operate in Missouri with 5,000 miles of track. Here locally, we have BNSF, and then Missouri, Northern Arkansas, I think, leases space from Union Pacific on a little bit. But we don't really have much in the way of ports or waterways here. Air cargo, about 10%. Goes through Springfield and Christy. I don't know if you plan to touch on that in a minute, but I thought I'd make sure to point that out. Let's see. So then MoDOT is going through and looking at the designation for the National Highway Freight Network. And so they're looking at criteria including labor force size, freight intensive employment, population size and growth, educational attainment, and location of military facilities. And there was a desire to have educational attainment look more at technical skills in addition to four-year degree. And so then looking also at important metrics for goods movement, and some of this I think will be good when we look at what we want to measure ourselves and what performance measures we want to put into place. But looking at freight tonnage, growth in freight tonnage, daily truck counts, growth in freight value, truck VMT, just straight up freight value, truck VMT by lane mile, and truck percentage. And so there's some good measurement there. Now, supply chain support criteria, these aren't things that we would necessarily get into, but what I think is interesting, we keep talking about how do we look at economic development, and so maybe there's some ideas here too, but number of targeted industry jobs supported, tonnage and value, and then a number of firms within targeted industry. And then also looking at those various industries. So just skipping ahead for a second, they're looking at also analysis criteria, including access and connectivity, economic activity, goods movement, and supply chain support. So then there was a lot of discussion about short line railroads, which we don't really have that here, but looking at funding and the argument that class 1 railroads can pay for a lot of things the short lines necessarily can't. And so how does that get divided up? And then because we've had a lot of discussion out of our survey about passenger rail, I thought I would also point out there was a lot of discussion about the River Runner service between Kansas City and St. Louis. That particular service has about 10 stations. Let's see. One thing I wanted to point out, so there were some comments on that, and it mentions rural Missouri, but I think, you know, there's a lot of Missouri that has to travel, maybe not necessarily major airport for Springfield, but the rail access is definitely not available. Like down here, there was a mention that it was not convenient to Springfield, and then some of the pricing and other concerns there. So I know that Amtrak's not necessarily freight per se, but they share that network, and so it's probably an important consideration. And so I was also just happy to see that, you know, Springfield was mentioned in that. And so there's still some upcoming work on how to kind of determine needs and what roads should be on the kind of freight network. Additional discussion about Hyperloop that is planned to be included as part of the freight plan. And then emerging technology is expected to be included with everything as well. OTO has been participating with Mark to coordinate a study of freight technology, and then also data sharing, I think, is part of that. And I don't know if Andy or you've been a part of that study, or Frank or Brittany, do you have any other comments on the Missouri Freight Plan?
Hey, Natasha, I'm on, I guess, our MoDOT committee that's working with this plan, and it's actually a statewide freight and rail plan, so that's why they're covering the passenger rail with this as well. And I shared with that group that when we've done the MoDOT long range plan, we got a ton of public comments about passenger rail service for both Springfield and Joplin, and it's generally not been done because of the extraordinary cost of it. So they're talking about doing some public outreach in our area, and the consultant's going to look at having kind of a educational component to that discussion about why it's so hard to provide passenger rail service to our area.
Yeah, so education on why it's difficult is great, but it'd also be nice to maybe, I don't know, kind of find a way to maybe explore that more, produce other options. So that might be something to think about. Andy, I know it's like a whole JS experience as far as the draft map of Freight Network and stuff, but you had mentioned we have some comments that we were going to provide, and do you want to briefly mention what is on that network?
Yeah, there were a few segments. MoDOT shared out a map of kind of what they're looking at their freight system, their tier 1, 2, tier 3, tier 2 and tier 3 of some of their critical urban freight corridors. I think their process was a rather data-driven process, and so there were a few spots that logically I think just got left out because you didn't look at it because it didn't meet the hard and fast criteria. But there was a little bit of 744 or Kearney Street around the Pick East Industrial Park that wasn't, part of that road was, part of it wasn't, the connection over to 65 wasn't, so that needs to be included. The connection on the east end of it where you come up to I-44 wasn't included. That was something that needed to be on there to provide that alternative access to I-44. There was a segment of MM that wasn't included next to the new Amazon, next to the Magellan pipeline terminal, so that there was a good reason to go ahead and include that one. I commented as well on a couple of segments out towards Stratford with the new rail park that's coming in and some of the industrial development that's happening there at the intersection of 125 and Route 66. I thought I would throw those in because I know there's potential for a lot and there is some being constructed right now. So those were the big areas on the freight system that kind of stood out to me as might deserving of a second look. And that's kind of what I submitted on.
Thanks, Andy. And just also wanted to point out our freight assets are increasing locally. I know BNSF has been going through and adding some double track in places, as well as just improving their own lines. And then we have a couple years ago, they opened up a transload facility at Springfield Underground. And so we're able to then connect kind of away from the rail yard, we're able to connect up rail and trucks. And then Stratford's really looking at trying to expand kind of this industrial park with rail access. And so on top of that, the relation between UPS and FedEx and the airport and the general aviation coming in through there. And so we really, freight really is a growing resource in our community. And so with that, are there any freight plan questions and or passenger rail? Okay, thanks. So Christy, you should be good to share your screen if you have anything.
Do you see that?
We do, thanks.
Sorry. It helps if you unmute yourself. Just a few slides. For us, the pandemic has really hit us hard. And not just us, just airports in general. So first couple of slides are just going to go through kind of national trends on passengers, just general commercial service passengers. So let's see if I can get this to go. Okay, so this one just kind of shows that big dip that we saw back at the beginning. So the blue line up top is what 2019 was as far as passengers through TSA checkpoints. So on a daily basis, they were seeing about 2 to 2.5 million. And at our lowest point, we were about 80 or 90,000 through the entire airport system in the United States. So this kind of runs through November, but through November, kind of the national average was down 45% from where it was in 2019. Springfield, this is ours. This is through October. We were not down as bad. We were down about 55%. We ended 2020 down about 50% from where we were. So we've definitely felt it. The airline industry has felt it, and it's been an interesting year. This is interesting. This we get from kind of our air service development consultants. So what you see here is big disruptors in the industry. So September 11 is the red line where you saw a huge dip, the blue line, the Great Recession. And so really this purple line is where they see the COVID-19 pandemic and kind of how many months they think it'll be to get back to where we were before pandemic. So at best guess, right now we're about at this, 10, 11 mark as far as months go. The hope is maybe by summer of 2022, we'll be back. So this kind of leads into, well, I'll talk about cargo in a second. We really are in need of updating our master plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But because of the pandemic and the unfuture, kind of how the future looks for air travel, especially business air travel, is kind of keeping us from doing it right now. We're going to try to hold off another couple of years before we start our master plan project. This is our cargo. So we measure cargo by landed weights. So the FedEx and UPS operate out here, and they report to us monthly how many pounds of cargo they are offloading. So you can see in 2020, we've been pretty steady on cargo. It kind of has stuck around that 30 million, kind of 27 to 30 million pounds of weight. What I have been told, I was not here at the time, but pre-Great Recession, our cargo was a lot bigger. Some of that was, I think we used to have DHL operate out here, and so we're just down to 2. I think also, as we've seen the rise in Amazon, we've been told too, the Amazon facility that's going in Republic is really not gonna probably cause them to open up their own. They are operating some air cargo now under Prime, and they do not plan to do that in this market at this time. So we're hopeful, but as kind of a cargo operates over there, and they do quite a bit of business, but not nearly as much as they used to. This is just kind of some of our FAA planning stuff. I won't hit it too hard. This was our last master plan. So you can kind of see we have this parallel runway up here that's in our master plan. But for the most part, this master plan really was not serving us well as of 2019. We were really running out of space in the terminal. If you'd been out here in 2019, we had no parking left. This didn't really show an increase for parking. So we did this big rush to make sure we had all this parking ready for spring break of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. So I have a lot of empty parking lots right now, but we're hopeful that one day they will be back in full use. But I just show this to kind of give an idea. So long term, we've got this parallel runway. We own a lot of this land already. We have a lot of air easements already. So we have a lot of the planning in place to do that, but more than likely we'd be looking at extending this runway down here. This is our GA area down here. We'll talk about that. This is cargo, and we've got some kind of newer things going on over there as well. So in 2019, we had a pavement condition study. So just know blue and green is good, red and pink are bad. So we use this to justify our most recent project. So this is our cargo ramp over here, and this taxiway is what most of the cargo carriers would use to get to the runway. So this is our taxiway U rebuild. So right here, we rebuilt the entire taxiway all the way up to the runway. We built a blast pad, and then we did some panel replacement kind of here in the middle of the runway. So this project was in the Airport Business magazine, so that was exciting for us. These are kind of some of the areas that as we are looking into the future that we either need to replace or update in the next 5-10 years. So a lot of this is just older pavement. It's not, especially down here in this GA area. And as we'll talk, we've kind of run out of room. And so we're really going to have to try to look and be creative on where we get some hangar development coming in. So back about 6-7 years ago, this was this area right down here, and I'll show you some more pictures. This is a development program that we did with some MoDOT aviation funds to extend this taxiway so we could provide development areas for new hangar development. So a lot of the hangars over at the GA facility, we don't own. The people that built the hangars lease land from us and then build their hangar and operate their aviation departments on their own, in their own hangar. So in general aviation, we've had a lot of, like I said, this is that area where we expanded. This is the original Oz Air hangar, which is this one right here. And Oz Air has built this and this. And then in phase 2, we extended the taxiway. So we were able to get 2 more large hangars in there. And these 2 spots are now also, this one is finished. And this one, I think we will be leasing out soon. So we've seen a lot of growth in large hangar development recently. This is just some photos of new hangars being built. So future development, we just recently, through help with the city of Springfield, issued bonds, and we are currently constructing this new hangar for an increased Envoy maintenance facility. Currently, Envoy that flies for American Airlines, they have a maintenance facility on the GA ramp, and it's just not large enough for their future routes. So we are building this hangar, and then we will own it and we will lease it to them. That's just some of the pretty pictures. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we're at. Just kind of waiting to see how the pandemic, if it ends someday.
Thanks, Christy. Any questions? Okay, I've got just a few. Have there been any comments or discussion among, like, from your general aviation or your freight partners about the connection into the airport or any other things related to that?
I have not heard anything. I think for the most part, the general aviation customers are really going to be locals. If they are flying in here from a general aviation, they're doing usually 1 of 2 things. They're stopping for a fuel stop if they're a smaller plane and they're going cross country, or they're coming here to check out other facilities. So really the roadways in and out of general aviation are pretty good. We have some concerns, and I think that we've been working with Public Works. That new Envoy facility is on the other side of the airfield from general aviation. It's on the cargo ramp, and there's some concerns about Old Willard Road over there and flooding, but I think we're working through some planning with them to make sure that those employees that need to get over there can if we have a large rain event.
Okay.
So, I mean, for the most part, we have the ability to grow pretty easily because over the years we have purchased land, developed land, and we've got a lot of air easements that are able to make sure that our airways are protected, because that's a big part for us. A lot of the growth around here is really kind of putting those easements, not a strain's kind of a word, but I know it's I wouldn't say hindering development, but I know that it's taking, you know, there's a lot of planning that has to go into place to make sure that those developments are not hitting our airspace. So the new soccer facility that's being proposed out Chestnut, I know there's just a lot of things that as Republic grows and Willard grows, that kind of encroaches on our area. So we just want to maintain our land and our air easements.
Okay. And then I only asked this because I got a Facebook ad this weekend trying to offer me charter flights. You know, private's the way to go. It's like, okay. But have you noticed, have private flights or chartered flights picked up as people are trying to avoid a larger crowded plane or anything?
I mean, really the only charter service we have would be on the GA side would be Oz Air. And I think their business is staying pretty steady.
Okay.
If you are going to charter a plane, it's going to be for a business reason. It's probably not going to be just your standard everyday user of the airport. I think what will be more interesting long term is business travel through the terminal, through the just commercial service, as we've all been doing Zoom meetings and traveling less for business. I think there's a concern that that will move forward. A lot of the air travel we're seeing right now out of the terminal is for just private vacation, not really business related.
Do you have a feel before COVID what your balance was between business and leisure?
I mean,
it's a guesstimate.
It was a majority of business travel. Yeah, so leisure travel is definitely driving the usage right now. So I think long term, we're going to need to see some recovery of that business travel market.
All right, well, thanks. Any other questions? Okay. And then I asked Andy, we're going to have a larger discussion about the bike ped stuff at the next TPC meeting, but I asked Andy to kind of give a brief preview of what's been happening on that front, just so everyone's aware of those discussions.
Yeah, so while the TPC has been having conversations together on kind of the road and bridge side, the BPAC has been working on the trail bike ped component for the last 9 months or so. We've kind of broken it up into two major conversations. One about regional trails that's been going on for quite some time, and another conversation that we're kind of starting on more on the local trail systems or local bike ped systems within our individual municipalities. Our processes that we're following are not necessarily your standard kinds of discussions, both on local system and on the regional system. For our regional system, we are not identifying new corridors. We're not necessarily prioritizing what construction should be done. We are working to figure out what our expectations are for the future, where we think we want to be, where we would like to be in 2045, and then kind of going and looking at, are we on track as far as the investments that we're making? Are we going to achieve that? As we've looked at different kinds of scenarios, we've landed on 45 by 45, 45 miles of new trails by 2045. That's kind of our goal that we're going to work towards. Regardless of where those 45 miles of new trails are built with an expansion of that size, we're going to see gaps filled, and we're going to see communities connected. And that's what our expectations really were. So as we've looked at, are we on track to achieve that? If you look at our long range investment averages, maybe we're not on track, but these last few years with some of the omnibus funds that we've been able to put towards trails, we've had a big funding push, and it looks like that funding push, if we can maintain that we might could achieve that 45 by 45. So we're having some interesting conversations about how maintenance might affect that, how the distribution of trails throughout the region and the variety of funding mechanisms that exist throughout the region, how that might complicate things. So we're having some good conversations. We're going to have a work session, I think our first ever work session with the TPC in February. I'm a glutton for punishment, so I like to try new things. So we'll see what kind of conversations we can have, and then we'll take that back to the BPAC and allow them to kind of digest what the TPC has to say. As far as our conversations on the local systems, we're not trying to make a regional biped plan that lays out different types of infrastructure, or has those typical discussions of middle-aged men in Lycra and interested but concerned cyclists. We are trying to spell out priorities and information that is going to be relevant to the decisions that our board of directors are going to be making, and that Sarah is going to need to have when she's going out into the community. And that's looking like some sort of statement of priorities. And those priorities are going to be condensed down into a nice one-pager, we think. And they're broadly grouped together as looking at the overall structure of the plan, of what the biped network will look like in our individual municipalities, the kinds of services, the kinds of connections, and not at all the kinds of infrastructure. Some priorities about the integration between the local system and that regional system, and then some priorities about funding, both with partnerships and with encouraging and supporting where we can additional new funding sources that exist within the region. So we're excited about these conversations. We've had some good ideas, some good things talked about. I think the trail component, where we stand right now, it's going to kind of be adopted as a standalone plan and be referenced as the biped component. I'm not sure how we're going to incorporate the local discussion in with the broader Destination 2045 conversation, but like I said, we're just we introduced that conversation at our January meeting, so we're getting that one kind of kicked off. I think that'll go a little quicker than our trail conversation. But that's kind of where we've been at, some of those big picture ideas on where we're going and what we think might be best for the region.
Great, thanks, Andy. Any questions, or John, I don't know if you want to have anything you want to say about the future of kind of Ozark Greenways and regional and anything on that note?
So I think Andy covered everything from the biped trail perspective that we're doing with BPAC. Regionally within the Chadwick Flyer connection between Ozark and Springfield is a project that's hot on everybody's plates, and maybe Jeremy wants to talk about that. And I think that's about it for now.
Okay, thanks.
I can add that some of we funded with this last round some regional trail planning services, and so that's allowing Mary to go out and spend a little more time outside of her traditional stomping grounds, going out and helping out Jeremy with the Chadwick Flyer and Ozark, making closer relationships with Republic as we look at getting the Wilson's Creek Trail out. And so I think if we can continue to fund that and we can continue to enable Mary to spread the reach and the breadth of Ozark Greenways, that we'll see a lot of good things happen. I think it'll be beneficial.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding kind of this multimodal discussion before we move on to the next part of the agenda? Okay. So I wanted to have a discussion about goals and recommendations for the plan. And so we've had a few comments in the chat. Cole had to run to another meeting, and then Frank says, good presentations, very informative. So let me share the agenda packet again. And on the kind of, things that we absolutely have to consider. So when we're looking at developing this plan and our overall planning process at OTO, we are asked to, one, be continuous, cooperative, and comprehensive. And so we call that the 3 C's. But then there are planning factors that we need to address in everything that we do. And there are 10 of them. These continue to evolve with each transportation surface reauthorization. And so I think there might even be a few changes since with the FAST Act since we last adopted Transportation Plan 2040. There is a new reauthorization already past due. And so I imagine that these might change again based on the current administration. I imagine we'll see something to do with climate change being enhanced in this, but it also requires cooperation from both chambers of Congress. And so we can only guess what these may end up looking like. But we do need to make sure that we focus on the economic vitality of our region, looking at increasing safety, increasing security, increasing accessibility and mobility. And so let's see, the next one is protecting and enhancing the environment. But I imagine we'll probably see that maybe be strengthened. Enhance the integration and connectivity of the transportation system, that's between modes for people and freight. Promote efficient system management and operation. Emphasize the preservation of the existing system. Improve resiliency and reliability. And then enhance travel and tourism. And so I think that was one of the newer ones. Resiliency has also shown up within the last 10 years. And I think Christy really kind of hit it talking about disruptors. And I know every industry feels things a little bit different, but when we look at the last 20 years, we have had September 11th. And so you can almost see how that relates back into the request that we increase the security of the transportation system. And then looking at the Great Recession, and that really kind of changed a lot of people's situation and how they use and interact with our transportation system. And then also, COVID has just shown the difficulties in, trying to plan for those drastic changes in usership and how things are funded and the reliability on those funding sources. And so all things to talk about there. So somehow, maybe not in these exact words, but we do need to make sure that we're addressing these concepts when we develop our goals. And Transportation Plan 2040, our goals, kind of almost matched initially about support the economic vitality of the region. And I know in all of our discussions, I continue to hear that come up. Encourage productive land use through consistency between planned growth, economic development patterns, and transportation improvements. And so I know we've been, especially with everyone renewing their comprehensive plans recently, that's been a larger topic of conversation. We kind of lumped together increasing safety and security, and then increasing accessibility and mobility, improve connections within and between all modes of transportation, encourage efficient system management and operations, preserve the existing system and monitor system performance, maximize resources through partnerships, actively seek secure and reliable transportation funding, providing education and advocacy. And I know that continued to come up through all of our visioning workshops and everything. Protect and enhance the environment, and then support the efficient movement of goods. And so really those line up with the planning factors fairly well, with some additional items in there, except for the enhanced travel and tourism. And so while you could probably argue some of these things might help achieve that, that might be something that we look into a little bit more. We've already kind of reviewed these at a prior meeting, but I went ahead and included here for your reference, kind of related recommendations from our area comp plans that have put together their recommendations already. And so they're organized kind of between a couple categories: bike, ped, trail, multimodal type improvements. So that includes transit as well. Aesthetics, that's something we keep hearing over and over. Funding, roadways and operations, and then development and land use, where it relates to transportation. So then I also included for your reference highlights from our visioning workshops, you know, and really looking for that vision and our opportunities, being regional, being proactive, looking at how to provide education and analysis, long-term funding, and that collaboration. And then trends out of our survey, over and over we saw trails, bike ped, transit, passenger rail. So really a lot of things not necessarily tied to the roads. We did see some specific highways come up in the region, including I-44. Maintenance was mentioned repeatedly, and then having that connection between Greene and Christian counties. In some cases, going through all of the various comments we received, it was sometimes called the Kansas extension. Sometimes people just called it a third connection, but really looking at how we improve that, and then funding. And so, and again, kind of that vision for the future, having those regional connected trails, complete streets, and lower drive times. And then this is just a draft, and I think there might be some adjustments by the time we get to the TPC workshop that Andy talked about doing with the February meeting, but also some just specific recommendations on the kind of sidewalk and on-street side of things beyond the trail system. So I'd like to ask, are there things that we want to adjust to our Transportation Plan 2040 goals? Are there suggestions for removing things or adding to those? I think that's probably a really good place to start, because they do capture these planning factors, but I know they don't necessarily reflect everything that's come out of our latest surveys. Jeremy, anything that you'd see from the City of Ozarks perspective? Or Kirk, anything?
Yeah, I think we need to emphasize funding a little bit more. I mean, I think the DOT really needs an increase in ability to not only take care of their system, but be able to do improvements. And it's kind of been a long time since they've had an increase. They also need to be better competitive in the job market. Right now, they're not able to compete as well as some other industries for employees.
Yeah, and I know, you know, our, I guess, distribution of funding, you know, there's always more competition for how that gets used. For example, in this plan, we've, you know, been hearing over and over in the last year or two about aesthetics and improving the look of projects, and those cost more. And so trying to find the balance between that and the increasing maintenance needs, and then being able to address additional needs. So yeah, I think funding's good. We've lost a few people on the call, but Joel or Jeremy or Frank or John, anybody have any other comments?
Natasha, this is kind of just more of a suggestion or something to think about.
Sure.
I worked with another MPO on their MTP update recently, and I think they had a total of 9 goals, but they kind of they added some like objectives under each goal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you can get more specific, like, you know, under safety, it might be, you know, support MoDOT's Show Me Zero plan or something. So like if you wanted to get a little bit more detailed, but not add a ton of goals, that you can kind of add that in like as objectives underneath a goal.
Mm-hmm.
So just something to think about.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, and I didn't include all those kind of specific recommendations like we had from the last plan with this discussion, but we definitely will look at having actions that we can implement over the life of the plan and as recommendations through 2040. So, but that is a good way to maybe focus on some of those additional things that, you know, may not appear right off to be covered by what the specific goal is.
Right.
Thanks.
Might also highlight some of the funding concerns that Kirk brought up. I mean, funding is addressed in these goals, but not very specifically, and adding some objectives would help emphasize that without committing one way or another, and maybe some of those, maybe some of the specific things that Kirk brought up.
Thanks. I'll say just from some of the discussion that we had just earlier in this meeting, some things that I heard also, and some of this may fall more into an objective than the goal per se, but you know, really what is the strategic plan, or what is the desired, you know, as far as transit goes, what do we desire for transit? The city utilities, you know, and waiting on Destination 2045 and Forward SGF, and you know, there's been a lot of discussion about more service, but what does that really look like, and does it really need to be everywhere? And so maybe really getting helping CU develop a clear picture of what that future focus needs to be. And I think Matt had talked about working on that plan. So that was something, and then the funding that goes along with that as well. Something else, I think, you know, really some of that accessibility focus. MoDOT's been, you know, going through and addressing their ADA plan. Springfield, I know, has I think a 30-year plan or something like that to try to address needs. But are there ways that with our projects or you know, being future mindedness, how do we address that accessibility. And then along with that education discussion, maybe definite focus on passenger rail, or trying to expand that passenger rail conversation to what alternates exist to get, within Missouri, maybe not just driving your car down I-44 or up Highway 13, or, what does that look like? And we always hear about asset management. I think that was something that came out, definitely through our survey and our visioning workshops. Are there any just, general concepts like funding or other things that you want us to focus on? And staff can put together a, kind of a list of things based on this conversation and what we've received so far. And we can always kind of pass that around offline as well. Jeremy, you looked like you might have been ready to say something earlier.
Yeah, I was agreeing with the funding and the conversation that was occurring there, and then I was thinking, from an administrative standpoint, on an ordinance level, we're always trying to take these ideas and figure out how to implement them. And you're right, so many people come to us and say, this looks terrible. The aesthetics of this needs to be improved, and our constant battle is, we barely have enough money to maintain our existing roads. We can't turn every road into this, beautiful boulevard or, pedestrian scaled and all that good stuff. But one of the things in the plan, and I don't know if we recommend this or if you mention it somewhere else, but the smaller communities around Springfield, are we striving to uniformly pass any type of complete streets or any type of legislation, for lack of a better word, that we want to uniformly follow, or is that too strict of a recommendation for us smaller suburban communities?
I I guess that would be a question for, how would Ozark approach it if, the OTO, and we do that with our, we do that with our major thoroughfare plan and what we're looking to, kind of the changes we're looking to make with that. We've always had at OTO a very general complete streets, we'll say policy or recommendation, but I think we're seeing a lot of MPOs working to have a more concrete policy and how things get implemented, pluses and minuses. So OTO, we distribute our funding to our communities who then can, you have an opportunity to plan and prioritize and put into place projects. Whereas other MPOs that do a competitive application for that funding, they're able to, I guess, tie that to certain types of improvements and including certain types of improvements that would include complete streets concepts. But, maybe we can explore how that could look for our region and how OTO partners with our communities. But I know even Springfield and Kirk, I don't know if you can talk to this, but there are ways that communities can ask for things out of, even on the development side, and then times when you can't, depending on how that development's taking place, and so whether things can only happen at this subdivision process versus rezoning versus, other requirements. And so I know that's a challenge to be met by our communities as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. We try to, have sidewalks be included in developments when possible. But there always has to be some flexibility there. I guess as we ask for more things, it seems like we should ask for the funding as well. I guess I would be reluctant to have a really strict clean streets policy, because that may put you in a position where you have to do less, really. You won't be able to do as many linear feet of improvement, I guess is what I'm saying, because you're adding features that cost more. And there is a lot of support to certainly add trails and sidewalks and accessibility for biking. That's, you know, we're hearing that a lot, like you did in your surveys.
And again, as a region and with each of our communities, we need to decide, are we okay with maybe a smaller, more complete project? And maybe it'll take longer to achieve those final goals, but you know, it's just a matter of comparing those needs at that time and the goals of those improvements as well.
One thing that Ozark Greenways is doing, with our partnership with MRT, Missourians for Responsible Transportation, they have formed the Missouri Livable Streets Advisory Committee that we're part of. And it's relative, I think it's relatively new, at least my involvement is relatively new. And that would, although that's not specific to our area and the small towns adjacent to us, like Jeremy was asking about, but it is going to be a resource for the same elements that go into complete streets and that sort of thing.
You said you guys had some umbrellas or something.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's something as we develop the objectives, we can kind of see what that looks like for us. But we are hearing those, and then that kind of goes back somewhat to education, maybe not even necessarily of the public or of the users, but how can we more comprehensively approach some of these projects, and maybe it's not a trade-off necessarily between complete streets and, you know, the desired function of the roadway. Plus, some of that all ties back into those other goals of economic vitality and kind of enhancing the community. Frank, anything that you're hearing or anything from MoDOT's perspective?
Excuse me, no, not right now. I think in general, your general goals are all right on track with what the legislation requires you to do, and they're all good things that I think the public supports. I was trying to read through some of the specifics on the page just after this one, and kind of got tripped up on the capital improvements program. I think it's 2 pages down actually. On the and I wasn't sure. I already feel like the TIP is that capital improvements program, so I didn't know if there was something beyond what we do now with the TIP that we're looking at doing.
So that was a goal out of, I think it might have been the city of Stratford's comprehensive plan. And so, yeah, these are all things that were pulled from a local level, but then kind of tie back in. So that's where that one came from.
Okay, gotcha. And I will say definitely when you look at things like aesthetics, just understanding like her saying, life cycle costs, maintenance burden. It's not just aesthetics, it's everything with the project, but understanding that when you add to something like that, is it increasing your maintenance burden, and can you provide for that? And I think we've, you know, MoDOT at state level, there's more discussion about, are we looking more at life cycle costs? We try to do that through asset management plans. But I think there's even been some discussions in the legislature about trying to incorporate that in the bidding process. So it's kind of on that level of attention. So I think it's a good thought. We've got to think about that. You know, when we get to the fiscally constrained plan, I'll give you lots of asset management information to put in there.
Well, and maybe,
I'm sorry, I was saying, I think it'd be good to kind of, as we look at the asset management plan, when we break up the fiscally constrained new projects, also considering then what's the cost to maintain those in the future. So increasing asset management plans to expand the system.
yeah, and some of that discussion, and so it's making me think maybe something that we can, you know, include with our implementation plan over the next 5 years, but looking at what best practices are out there for including things that might traditionally be considered extra, but ways to include those in a way that's, you know, fiscally reasonable, and, you know, maybe there's a trade-off where they provide an efficiency that wouldn't otherwise be there. And so maybe there's some best practices out there where we can have a discussion that's not just about trade-offs, perhaps. So are there other things that over the next kind of few years that OTO could be doing that would maybe support some of these discussions or desires? And those would maybe, you know, kind of fall down into more of that action range, but is there anything else that anyone can think of? Okay, well, given that it is 11 o'clock, and I know we've dropped off a few people, I'm going to summarize this discussion and the information that was provided earlier in this meeting, and kind of put forth some of those things that we're hearing out of the survey, and then what we just discussed here, and then see, we might be able to do some kind of just email discussion ahead of our next meeting. And so appreciate everyone being here today, but any final comments before we go? All right. Well, thank you, Christy. And I think you're the last one that presented today that's still on here. So appreciate everyone that was able to help provide that information. So
I must have drove them all away.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, have a good weekend.